Today's topic of discussion is the basic principles of extemporaneous speaking, or extemp for short. Now, when it comes to extemp, I'm sure the very first burning question that everyone has is, what is it? Well, with regards to extemp, there are three basic things you need to know. The first is that extemp is entirely spontaneous. It's not like those pre prepared activities where you find a topic and then you research it and then you create an outline and then you memorize it and then you program in hand gestures. It's very different because you receive the topic on the fly, and so the speech is entirely spontaneous. Now, the second thing you have to realize is that the entire purpose of an extemporaneous speech is to answer a question. Thirdly, this question is always going to be regarding political or current events. You're never going to get a question on whether dogs are better than cats or whether chocolate is better than vanilla. The topics are always going to be political, and that is the heart of extemp as an activity. So, on the topic of topics, some common things that questions may be about are climate change, politicians, discrimination, wars, unrest, etc. Now, there are two different categories with regards to extemp. You may enter an IX or NX. NX stands for National Extemporaneous, and in NX, topics are always limited to domestic or national affairs, which means that your question is always going to have to do with events that occur in the United States or that concern the United States. Whereas IX, or International Extemporaneous, regards foreign affairs. So if you get a question on China or the Taliban or the UN, that's all going to fall within the scope of IX. So, once again, as you may or may not remember, the entire purpose of an extemp is to answer a question. And so let's look at some question examples. If you enter an NX, you may be asked, is the US investing enough in renewable energy? What changes should be made to the International Revenue Service or the IRS? Will former President Trump face legal charges for mishandling classified documents? Alternatively, you may want to enter in IX. In that case, your questions may be, has Turkey's central bank lost its credibility? Should global powers work to contain the Taliban? Does China have the upper hand in disputes over the South China Sea? Now, as a general research, I highly recommend Extemp Central. This is an excellent resource every single week. They post 10 questions both for NX and for IX. And so that means that you're going to be practicing for up to date questions. Now, let's discuss the procedure of Extemp. Now, obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, some tournaments have moved online. And so the procedure for Extemp is slightly different based on if the tournament is in person or not. However, it is relatively similar. So let's begin with the in person procedure. Now, the very first step is to walk to your prep room, which is definitely important because you need to receive your question so you know what your speech should be about. The second step is to receive your speaker number. So, as with all other events in speech, the way it works is that there are a different number of rooms, and in each room, there are about 7 speakers. And so, the first speaker is going to be labeled as speaker number 1, the second speaker is going to be speaker number 2, etc. And so, you walk to your prep room, and then once you arrive at your prep room, you're going to receive your speaker number. The third step is to receive your question. First, the person running the prep room will say, Speaker number 1, come up. And then all the speakers number 1 are going to come and receive 3 questions. And of these 3 questions, they get to decide one that they're going to give their speech on. Next, you receive 30 minutes to prepare. So your prep time is 30 minutes. Now, note you want to allocate at least 5 minutes of your time to finding your judging session. So you're probably going to get more like 25 minutes to prepare. Next, the fifth step is to walk to your judging session or your room. And then finally, you deliver a 7-minute speech. Now, note that usually speakers receive questions in a staggered format, such that every 7 minutes or at 7-minute intervals, the next speaker numbers receive their questions. And so, in a hypothetical utopian tournament, what happens is as soon as speaker number 1 finishes their speech, they leave the room, and then speaker number 2 enters, they deliver their speech, they leave the room, and so on. It should be like a steady flow of speakers. Obviously, tournaments tend to get behind schedule. However, that is hypothetically the way it should work. Now, online, the first step is to receive an email with your speaker number. Then you join the prep meeting, which is just going to be on 8x8 or Zoom. Finally, you receive your question, and this time your question is probably going to be sent to you in the chat. You're going to receive 3 questions, and then once again, you're going to be able to choose one. You receive 30 minutes to prepare. You join your room, and this time your room is going to be on 8x8 or Zoom, and you're probably just going to receive a notification or some email with a link to it. And finally, you deliver your 7-minute speech like any old in person tournament. So now that you know the basics of Extemp, the next step is to learn the structure.